Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we try to crack some of the toughest nuts in philosophy, in literature, and in history. Our goal is always to give you the essential knowledge you need without you having to spend, a whole year wrestling with the material yourself.
And today, we have a big one.
We really do. Today, we are taking on a titan, a book that is, I think it's fair to say, more often cited than actually read, and almost always misunderstood. Friedrich Nietzsche's monumental, poetic philosophical scripture, also Spoke Zarathustra. Thus spoke Zarathustra.
This is maybe the most ambitious text we could have picked. It's intentionally complex, it's cloaked in metaphor, and it's written not as a traditional philosophical argument.
No, not more.
It's written like the gospel of a modern-day prophet, Zarathustra, and we know its reputation. It's riddle-like, it can feel contradictory, and, Nietzsche himself admitted that the philosopher in the text is playing this elaborate game of hide-and-seek.
Right, to protect his most volatile ideas from just being consumed too easily. Which is precisely why we're diving in. Our mission today is to give you that shortcut, the core insights you need to really grasp Zarathustra's journey and his intent. We've tried to distill the essence of the work into the four central philosophical pillars that pretty much all commentators agree on.
That's right. We're talking about the Übermensch, or the Overman, the Will zur Macht, the will to power, the Umwertung, which is the revaluation of values, and of course the terrifying, abysmal thought of ewige Wiederkunft.
Eternal recurrence.
The eternal recurrence.
Yeah.
The essential difficulty in interpreting Zarathustra, or ASZ as we'll probably call it, it really stems from this paradox that's just baked into its design. You're presented with a person, Zarathustra, who seems almost distant from the actual thought. He experiences it as a vision, or a torment, or a prophecy.
But you, the reader, can only get at the meaning through some pretty rigorous critical thinking.
You have to. You have to move past the poetry to understand the intellectual scaffolding that's holding up all his parables and his visions.
Okay, let's unpack this journey then. And I think the best place to start is with the text's architecture, because it is just strange. To understand Zarathustra's message, you first have to appreciate that Nietzsche designed this book with the kind of structural precision you'd expect from, a cathedral, not a typical philosophy book.
Yes. The form itself carries meaning. The structure is absolutely foundational. It tracks Zarathustra's physical and his spiritual path across four distinct parts. It mirrors his descent from the mountain to teach, then his return to solitude, and finally his ultimate emergence.
And scholars have really mapped this out, haven't they?
Oh, yes. Beatrix Himmelmann's analysis is a great example. She traces Zarathustra's path meticulously through all four parts. The frame narrative, the speeches, even the dream visions, it's all part of one continuous journey.
So walk us through the layout, because
Yeah.
it's not just four equal sections, is it?
Not at all. It starts with the preface, which has 10 chapters. That sets the stage for his descent and his first failed attempts at teaching.
Right.
Then comes the main body, parts 1, 2, and 3. Together, those total 60 chapters, and they're broken down in a very specific way. 22 plus 16.
22, 16.
Okay. And then finally, you have part 4, which acts as a sort of nekride, an afterword, or a postscript. That has 20 chapters, and it wraps up the whole narrative.
Just hearing those numbers gives you this fascinating sense of proportion and purpose. And I've heard that the internal structure of part 4, that final section, really emphasizes this meticulous design.
It does. The 20 chapters of part 4 are incredible because they follow the course of a single, highly compressed day. It starts with Zarathustra's morning, where he's anticipating his work, what he thinks will be his greatest triumph or maybe his greatest failure.
And it ends when?
It concludes dramatically with the striking of the midnight clock and the really powerful Night Wanderer song. It's this moment of deep, abysmal thought.
And this is where Nietzsche's precision becomes almost obsessive. It moves beyond just a philosophical outline into pure literary architecture. I understand the exact middle of part 4 is mathematically determined.
This is where the real genius of the design comes out.
Yeah.
The exact midpoint of those 20 chapters is chapter 10, which is very appropriately titled Mittag's Noon.
Noon. The high point.
The high point. And if you look at the text of that chapter, it consists of exactly 104 lines of verse. The precise middle, lines 52 and 53, contains these decisive sentences that just capture this moment of ultimate affirmation and silence.
What does it say?
Shrink back. Hot noon sleeps on the fields. Sing not. Be still. The world is perfect.
Wow. So the moment of absolute perfection, the great noon that he's always talking about, is literally positioned at the physical center of the final act.
It is. It demands that the reader stop and just absorb that silent affirmation. It signals the moment of highest tension, the highest potential, before things inevitably have to start moving again.
It's like he's forcing the experience on you through the structure of the book itself.
It creates a meta-narrative. The physical structure imposes the philosophical experience. You can't just rush past this moment. It is numerically mandated as the high point of the entire Part 4 arc.
That detail alone is just incredible. But the structural riddle goes even deeper when you consider the link to Nietzsche's whole anti-Christian project. Lawrence Lamper put forward this really captivating hypothesis that the entire composition of the book is, in essence, a parody of the Bible.
Lampert's theory is, it's very compelling. He argues the structural layout is fundamentally biblically parodical. It's designed to be a new counter-scripture.
And the evidence is in the numbers.
It's in the numbers. The key evidence is in the chapter counts of the first two parts. Part 1 and Part 2 each have 22 chapters. Now, why 22? Because it directly mirrors the 22 chapters of the Apocalypse of John, the book of Revelation, the final prophetic book of the New Testament.
So right from the start, by opening with two massive 22-chapter sections, he's setting the stage for a kind of Zarathustra's revelation, an anti-revelation.
Precisely. And the hypothesis tries to lock this in by getting the total chapter count to 66, which is, traditionally cited as the number of books in the Protestant Bible.
But how do you get to 66? The numbers were 22, 22, and 16. That's only 60. And then the final 20.
Well, this is where it gets a bit creative. To reach 66, Lampert suggests we have to count the final chapter of Part 3, which is called the Seven Seals, 7 times.
7 times.
So Part 3 has 15 regular chapters. If you add the 7 seals as separate segments, that gives Part 3 22 chapters as well. So you get 22 plus 22 plus 22, 66.
Okay, if that numerical manipulation actually holds, it's a brilliant piece of literary mockery.
Yeah.
It frames the entire book not just as philosophy, but as a new fifth gospel, designed to seal his doctrine of eternal recurrence against the Christian doctrine of the end of days.
It makes Zarathustra's work an eternalistic counter-revelation. Instead of a linear story that ends in a final judgment, a definitive end, the text seals a doctrine of cyclical return. The message is, there is no end of days. There is only the eternal return of the same day.
But, and this is a big but, the number 66 is where the whole theory hits a snag, isn't it? As compelling as the idea is, the math might be a little anachronistic for Nietzsche himself.
It is very difficult to secure. I mean, if Nietzsche was referencing a Bible, he would almost certainly have used the Luther Bible. And at the time, that version typically contained 65 books, not 66.
So the number's off.
The number's likely off. And what's more, if this were a direct parody, you'd expect a really clear structural divide in the book, something that mirrors the 39 books of the Old Testament and the 27 of the New.
Clear break, yeah.
And that kind of internal break, that clear Old Testament and New Testament division is just, it's not there in the text. The flow is continuous.
Okay, so to sum up the structure, the architectural precision around the noon chapter seems totally secure. The mirroring of the 22 chapters of Revelation feels like a very intentional anti-Christian gesture, but the whole 66-book total might be commentators reading a little too much into it.
I think that's a fair assessment. The intention to create a counter-scripture is undeniable, even if the precise number isn't perfectly locked in. And that intention, that's what's paramount. It leads us right to the foundational crisis that makes Zarathustra's entire teaching necessary in the first place.
The death of God and the nihilism that follows.
The great precondition.
And this is so important. Zarathustra isn't the one who announces the death of God. That's the madman in the gay science. He comes on the scene already assuming it's happened. His journey begins after 10 years of solitude. He comes down from his mountain, and the first person he meets is this old saint who is completely blissfully unaware of the cataclysm. He's heard nothing of it.
That first encounter in the preface is just crucial. It immediately establishes Zarathustra as post-Christian. He is operating in a new, ungrounded reality. And the God that has died, for Nietzsche, isn't just some metaphysical being up in the sky. It's the moral God.
What's the distinction there?
The moral God was the conceptual creation designed to give life a single, unified, common, teachable meaning. It was the guarantor for the sanctity and the truth of all our human values.
And when that guarantor dies, the values themselves, which that God once protected, they lose their foundation. They just sort of float there, unanchored.
They do. They become devalued. And this is the absolute core of nihilism. It isn't simply believing that life is meaningless. It's the internal process where the highest values devalue themselves. The belief structure is still there, but its transcendental source, its guarantee, is gone.
So there's this vacuum. We keep living as if the old moral hierarchy is true, but we secretly know it's just a convention. It has no ultimate justification anymore.
And that vacuum leads to a kind of existential paralysis, which Zarathustra confronts head-on.
Right, with the preacher of death.
The Wahrsager, the prophet of ultimate futility. This character proclaims that everything is empty, indifferent, transient, that life has no gain and is therefore futile. This is the intellectual poison of pure nihilism, and it gets so deep into Zarathustra's psyche that he sinks into this profound sadness. He can't eat or speak for 3 days.
It's almost a physical manifestation of that existential despair.
It is. That visceral 3-day collapse shows us that the death of God is not some cheerful liberation. It is a terrifying, profound disorientation.
It's the loss of what you called stable vertical transcendence.
Exactly. When the old God is negated, the very foundation of human existence is just erased. The horizon gets wiped away. We lose all sense of above and below, both morally and, in a way, physically. The world becomes this collapsing architecture because there's no fixed point left against which you can measure value or purpose or even distance.
So nihilism isn't the end product. It's the necessary, horrifying gap between the death of the old values and the creation of new ones.
Precisely. This existential chaos is the furnace where Zarathustra has to forge his new meaning. And this profound disorientation, this despair, this is exactly what makes the ultimate test. That abysmal thought of eternal recurrence so absolutely unbearable. Unless Zarathustra can first establish the vision of the Übermensch. You need a reason to affirm the chaos before you can stomach the thought of the chaos repeating itself forever.
That transition is perfect. The death of God is the crisis, nihilism is the despair, and the answer, the new center of gravity, is the Übermensch, the Overman. Let's really dive deep into this pivotal concept.
The Übermensch is introduced right away as the Sinn der Erde, the meaning of the earth, and we have to immediately clear up the most common misinterpretation.
That it's some kind of superhero or master race.
Exactly. It is not Superman in the comic book sense, nor is it a blueprint for some future political master race. That's a later toxic misreading. While humanity is described as the transition between the Überraff, the Overape, and the Overman, it's fundamentally about overcoming the limits of previous human existence.
The moral, spiritual, and psychological limits.
Those are the ones, so it's not an evolution of the species, but an intensification of the individual's relationship to themselves.
So what is that overcoming process, that Über sich hinausschaffen? What does it actually look like in practice?
It's a ceaseless self-overcoming, a continuous act of creation that transcends the limits placed on us by old morality and by habit. Zarathustra anchors the idea in this really powerful twin formula, which I think beautifully blends the abstract ideal with concrete action.
Okay.
First, he says, the Übermensch is the meaning of the earth. This is the static, vertical ideal. It's the standard of perfection he sets. But then he says, the Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth.
Ah, so that's the active part.
That's the horizontal, dynamic realization, the ongoing, unending creative act that's achieved through the will to power. It's a state we are perpetually striving for, not one we ever definitively reach and then just...
I think the most revolutionary part of this concept, especially given the history of Western philosophy, is the radical emphasis on the body, on the Leib. Zarathustra actively rejects the spiritualists, the Leibverrector, or despisers of the body.
This is the critical philosophical reversal. He's challenging 2 millennia of Platonic and Christian dualism that saw the body as inferior or corrupt, or just a messy vessel for the superior soul.
The prison for the soul.
The prison, yes. Zarathustra insists that the human body, the Leib, is the most perfect example of a synthesis where above and below body and soul are not enemies locked in some eternal struggle. They're codependent poles working in a dynamic hierarchy.
And he gives the body intellectual primacy. He calls it the great reason.
Precisely. The Leib possesses the great reason, the gross vernunte, because it is this incredibly complex, self-organizing system that coordinates the entire organism. I mean, think about it in just evolutionary terms. The body doesn't need external moral codes or transcendent guarantees to maintain its order or heal itself or perpetuate life.
It is its own order.
It is its own living, organized architecture that manages the will to power internally.
So where does that leave abstract thought? The spirit. The Geist.
It's merely derivative. The Geist is the small reason. It's a secondary mechanism. Nietzsche calls it a tool and toy that serves the body's ultimate purpose of self-mastery and growth.
So if the head, the Kopf, becomes detached from the vitality of the heart and the foundational stability of the belly.
Then the spirit produces sterile, life-denying values. It starts creating rules from a place of weakness, from resentment, rather than from the overflowing strength of a healthy organism. This is why the health of the body dictates the very possibility of achieving the Übermensch ideal.
That makes the concept so much more relatable, even at this extreme philosophical altitude. Your psychological and intellectual capacity for self-overcoming is literally grounded in your physical organization and vitality. A healthy body is the foundation for existential freedom.
And that leads us right to the iconic imagery that Nietzsche uses to visualize this complex internal balance. We have to talk about the tightrope walker and the dance.
The Saltänzer. The tightrope walker appears right after Zarathustra begins to teach. What does that act of balancing symbolize?
It is the ultimate metaphor for what we could call immanent transcendence. The goal of the tightrope walker is not to leap off the rope and fly away into the clouds.
Which would be the old transcendent spiritual ideal.
That's the old temptation. The goal is to master the rope itself, better and better. And this mastery is a continuous, moment-to-moment process of perfect bodily self-control and balance. It embodies that struggle between the vertical striving toward an ideal and the horizontal striving toward dynamic realization, right here on the earth.
And there's the constant risk of falling, which symbolizes the necessary danger inherent in creating new values where you have no fixed safety nets below you.
Exactly. And the most perfect, the most joyous expression of this dangerous mastery is the dance, the tensor. The dancer achieves the most perfect motion because that vertical striving, the reaching, the rising, and the horizontal striving moving through space, they merge into the single, effortless, earth-affirming movement.
And where does laughter fit into the dance? Zarathustra is often called the laughing prophet.
Laughter is the philosophical release. The dancer is able to laugh at the seriousness of moral constraints, what he calls the spirit of gravity, that thing that tries to fix humanity in a rigid traditional image. Zarathustra, the warlocker or truth laugher, he conquers that gravity. Laughter allows the spirit to dance again because it affirms the individual's right to create their own morality, while also recognizing that morality is contingent, it's self-chosen, and it's temporary.
The dance is the absolute antithesis of the stoic, serious philosopher laboring under some transcendent moral weight.
It is joy in motion.
Okay, so we have the goal, the Übermensch, defined by the body's wisdom and realized through this dangerous, joyful mastery. But how do we power that creation? That brings us to the engine of the entire system, the will zur Macht, the will to power.
And this is maybe the most heavily politicized and misunderstood of all his concepts, largely due to how it was decontextualized and twisted after his death. Within ASZ, its primary function is not geopolitical or muscular dominance. He calls it a parable of time and becoming. And it necessitates ceaseless self-overcoming, Selbstüberwindung. It is a cosmological and a physiological drive.
So if it's not about brute force, what is its fundamental mechanism? How does it work?
The will to power is the inherent drive in all organized matter to resist entropy and to increase its mastery over its environment. But critically, it's not a fixed thing. It's not some in-itself substance that you can just tap into. It only exists through continuous confrontation, organization, and resistance. One will stands against others, and this confrontation forces both sides to constantly change, to organize, and to become something different, something stronger or something new.
So it's the drive toward creation, toward purpose, and toward the future, and it's defined by overcoming resistance in the present. It's what drives a muscle to tear itself down and then rebuild stronger.
That is a perfect analogy. It is the physiological impetus for the self-creation of the Übermensch, and it justifies transience and becoming, because the only true freedom lies in the creative act that is inherent in this perpetual striving. By embracing this dynamic principle, Zarathustra is effectively reaching back to Heraclitus's ancient wisdom. Everything is in flux.
The will to power is the thaw wind that breaks the ice.
Exactly. The ice of timeless truth, all those static, moral, and metaphysical certainties that had shackled humanity since Plato.
This inherent dynamism and the will to power, this constant state of flux, it leads directly to the practical philosophical task that Zarathustra has to undertake, the Umwertung aller Werte, the revaluation of all values. How are those two linked?
The will to power is the process, and the Umwertung is the necessary consequence. Since all our previous values were built upon the dead moral God and a life-denying, otherworldly worldview, they are now poisonous conventions. The will to power as a life-affirming creative drive must destroy and rebuild the entire moral landscape from the ground up based on the standards of earthly vitality and self-overcoming.
So the Umbertung means taking the old moral labels, good, evil, pity, chastity, and flipping their internal meaning, judging them based on whether they contribute to or detract from life, from strength, from creation.
Exactly. For Zarathustra, good is whatever promotes the will to power in the individual. Evil is whatever stems from weakness, from resentment, from the desire for stagnation. And this total revaluation is why his teaching is necessarily abrasive and so anti-doctrinal. He is destroying the very framework of universal moral comfort.
And this leads to his great paranoia about having disciples, right?
Mm.
He understands that if his teachings are just adopted as some new universal doctrine, he will have failed. He'll have just created a new, static moral god.
His teaching, his lere, is in danger. Not because the words are hard to understand, but because they're being consumed and repeated by people who haven't earned them, who haven't suffered the required self-overcoming. They just want the comfort of a new framework without doing the difficult, dangerous work of dismantling their old self.
It's the ultimate caution against a kind of intellectual consumerism. You can't just download the philosophy of freedom. You have to live the inner conflict that creation demands.
Which is why Zarathustra demands his disciples disown him and seek themselves. He issues that most important existential command, werde du bist, become who you are. He absolutely does not want apes of Zarathustra, followers who just mimic his actions or parrot his words without possessing the creative strength to internalize them.
And Nietzsche himself felt this way.
He stressed this point constantly. He used Zarathustra as a mask, an alter ego, precisely to protect himself from those who would misuse or simplify his pronouncements. He was writing for those strong enough to be his peers, not his acolytes.
Let's delve into one of the most brilliant literary techniques Nietzsche uses to perform this Umbertung, the strategy of Umkehrung, or reversal, which he uses against his philosophical predecessors, especially someone like Schopenhauer.
The strategy of reversal is a hallmark of his style. It's full of antitheses and paradoxes designed to just destabilize received wisdom. Take the example of Schopenhauer. He celebrated this ideal of lunar chastity, cold, will-less cognition, achieved by severing the intellect from the messy, hot business of desire and the body. The cold, unwarming moon was the perfect symbol for this pure, objective knowledge.
Because for Schopenhauer, the ideal sage seeks knowledge as a relief from the endless, painful striving of the will.
Yes. And Zarathustra flips this entirely in the chapter of Immaculate Cognition. He just mocks the attempt to achieve knowledge through detachment. He doesn't just reject the idea. He uses this shocking imagery to redefine the pure cognizers as the ultimate lustful ones. He calls the moon, that symbol of chastity, a deceptive, lustful monk who secretly desires the earth.
So he's not saying they successfully achieve purity. He's saying their attempt at purity is just repressed desire for life and procreation.
Exactly. It completely reverses the polarity of the traditional ascetic ideal. Zarathustra declares, "Even in cognition, I feel only my will's lust for procreation and becoming." For him, the highest form of knowledge, the kind that leads to the Übermensch, is not achieved by freeing yourself from the will. It's achieved by embracing the will to growth, to creation, to life. The purest knowledge isn't will-less, it's intensely willful.
And this commitment to confrontation and growth extends even to relationships. Zarathustra redefines the friend as the best enemy.
This is another profound revaluation of a core human bond. For Schopenhauer, friendship was a weak sentiment, just a mixture of selfishness and pity. Zarathustra elevates it. The friend is the best enemy because they provide the necessary resistance, the conflict that allows for creative disagreement and the enhancement of your own personality.
They challenge your opinions and your comfort, forcing you to articulate and strengthen your own identity, rather than just demanding conformity or pity.
The true friend doesn't want you to go over to their side. They want you to become stronger on your own side. This creative friction is essential to the will to powers mechanism, making the friend, ironically, the greatest aid you can have in self-overcoming.
So the Übermensch is the goal, and the Will zur Macht and the Umwertung are the engine and the method. But now we have to confront the final, ultimate test that validates this entire philosophical project, the ewige Wiederkunft, eternal recurrence. This is the thought that's supposed to separate the creators from the comfortable.
This is the abysmal thought, the highest formula of affirmation. And it had a profound, almost mystical origin for Nietzsche himself. He experienced it as a sudden, visionary revelation in August 1881, high in the Alps near a pyramidal rock, Unwitserli. 6,000 feet above human things. He wrote about that moment with a sense of just overwhelming weight and terror.
How is the thought articulated in its most terrifying form? What exactly does it mean?
It demands the absolute repetition of everything in the exact same order and sequence. Every sigh, every joy, every small, ugly moment, every single thought, not just once more, but innumerable times more.
Wow.
Which implies, cosmologically, that your life has already unfolded infinitely often, and it will continue to do so precisely as it is. There is no escape, no alternative timeline.
That is just relentlessly absolute. Why is it the ultimate test?
Nietzsche put it most clearly in The Gay Science, where he poses it as a diagnostic question. It's a weight that determines the measure of a person's life affirmation. He asks, or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life to crave nothing more fervently than this final, eternal confirmation and seal?
So thought of recurrence acts as a selection mechanism.
It does. If you can affirm even a single moment in your past, you must affirm the whole eternal chain without alteration, without evasion. It is a judgment on your entire life, passed by you.
And yet, when Zarathustra himself tries to summon and articulate this thought, he is seized by this powerful, almost incapacitating nausea. He falls unconscious for 7 days, just paralyzed by the vision. If he's a prophet of affirmation, what causes such a violent disgust?
The disgust is not caused by the repetition of his great triumphs or his hope for the Übermensch. The nausea is triggered by the return of the ugly, the small, and the mediocre man, the letzte Mensch, the last man. It is the repetition of the pettiness, the futility, the herd mentality that Zarathustra sought to overcome. The thought of eternal recurrence threatens to bring back the world negation and the nihilism he had fought so hard to defeat.
So the sickness is the fear that even his greatest creative effort will ultimately return to the base, unredeemed human reality.
Precisely. His great moment of self-overcoming, his self-strelosing, is symbolized in his dream of the shepherd biting off the head of a snake coiled in his throat. The snake is the thought of eternal recurrence, the most abysmal thought.
And biting its head off.
That act signifies his acceptance of life as a totality, the beautiful, the terrible, the base, and the grand. His readiness to affirm existence entirely. This marks his healing, his Jinasung, and his ability to finally sing the Ja and Amen lied, the Yes and Amen song that hails the eternal return of the same.
When we approach this concept intellectually, it can be really confusing. Is it a cosmological fact about the universe, or is it a psychological rule? But there's this powerful analysis that it functions best as a self-consuming concept. Can you explain what that means?
A self-consuming concept is one whose very articulation requires the contrasts or conditions it's trying to set aside. So, for example, if we treat eternal recurrence as a cosmological fact, that the universe will repeat itself, we need a linear notion of time to distinguish this configuration of atoms from its recurrence at some other identical point far in the future.
Right, you need a timeline to measure the repetition on.
But if time is truly cyclical, then the whole notion of recurrence at a different point becomes paradoxical. The concept kind of eats its own logical tail.
And what if we treat it purely as a normative ethical rule? As in, an imperative to live every moment as if you would want it repeated infinitely.
It runs into trouble there, too. At first, the liberation is dizzying, right? It gives every moment this immense weight. But then you run into the dismaying reality that your act of self-justification, your creation in the present, is merely a precise, inevitable rehearsal of past and future eternities of self-justification. It threatens to render the present act no more meaningful than the last infinite iteration.
The very tool for affirmation becomes a tool for philosophical self-negation.
Exactly. The resources for meaning become resources for meaninglessness.
So if it's fundamentally paradoxical and logically unstable, how should we understand its function within Zarathustra's teaching? What's it for?
It functions most powerfully as an eternalistic countermyth against what some have called chronophobia, humanity's deep-seated aversion to time, to transience, to impermanence. This fear of time is the psychological root of the ascetic ideal, that desire to escape the messy, changing world for some absolute eternal certainty.
So Nietzsche uses the tradition's own language of eternity and absolute to flip them on their head.
It's a calculated philosophical bait and hook. He uses the categories of eternity to force the acceptance and the radical affirmation of becoming and transience.
That makes incredible sense. To fully affirm a life of becoming, paradoxically, you have to have the courage to imagine its eternal return. This dynamic, self-generated meaning, it really brings to mind Albert Camus's famous interpretation of the myth of Sisyphus.
Camus's Sisyphus is the perfect modern counterpart to Zarathustra's dilemma. Sisyphus's endless, pointless task, pushing the boulder up the hill only to have it roll back down, is absolutely senseless from the transcendent perspective of the gods who condemned him.
But once the gods are gone, once the death of God is accepted,
Sisyphus's iterative task is viewed with new eyes. He is faithful to the earth and to the stones. He finds meaning not in the destination of the boulder, which will never stay, but in the continuous struggle, the creation of the journey itself.
the act of pushing.
The act of pushing. Like Zarathustra, like Dionysus, Sisyphus finds meaning only in the act of continuous creation, of schaffen, in the present moment. He shapes that moment so profoundly that he could, if asked, want it to return eternally. His life, though endlessly repetitive, is his own, without an external master or a final divine reward. As Kiomis concluded so powerfully, we must imagine Sisyphus happy.
That is the ultimate lesson of eternal recurrence. The origin of all sense lies in the creativity of an individual who shapes every moment, wanting it to return.
Yes.
This intense personal affirmation brings us to the final, necessary chapter of Zarathustra's story. The teacher's retreat and his failure to find a worthy audience. If his doctrine is so powerful, why does his journey end in disappointment?
Zarathustra repeatedly fails to find a proper recipient for his gift. He descends from the mountain to give away his wisdom, but he's constantly frustrated when his message is accepted as just another direct doctrine, a new set of rules, rather than a demanding call for radical self-development.
And he's always drawn back down to the crowd by Mitleiden.
By pity, yes, which he eventually realizes is the greatest danger to the creation of new values. Pity is weakness disguised as virtue.
His final attempt at teaching is in part 4, where he gathers the so-called higher men to his cave. They are intellectuals, artists, critics. But they are not the Overmen, are they?
Far from it. They're still tired, they're still weak. They are the casualties of nihilism. They have retreated from the nausea and the chaos, but they are looking for comfort, not courage. Zarathustra tries to shock them into life, reminding them they must have the courage to attack their own opinions and cling only to those truths they have genuinely seen through for themselves.
But instead of embracing the will to power, they regress. They start looking for a new authority. And this culminates in one of the great satirical scenes in all of philosophical literature, the ass worship.
The farce is deliberate and it's hilarious. The higher men, completely unable to bear the responsibility of creative freedom, regress into this pathetic new worship. They kneel and they pray to an ass who simply repeats Zarathustra's affirmation of life by constantly braying, ja, ja, which in German is Jaziel.
The yes ass. So they've mastered his words, the outward yes to life, but they have learned nothing from him.
Nothing at all. The final pope figure in the group speaks for them all, declaring, better to worship God in this form than in no form at all. They are desperate for a stable structure, for a transcendent guarantor, even if it is utterly ridiculous and just braying.
The genius of that scene is the idea that when people cannot create meaning for themselves, they will worship anything, even the most absurd symbol, just to avoid that existential weightlessness.
That is the diagnosis. Their worship of the ass is the ultimate proof of their failure to become the Übermensch. They substituted the difficult act of creating values with the easy act of worshiping a symbol of unearned affirmation.
So Zarathustra's ultimate liberation is the recognition that disciples are precisely what he does not want. His concern shifts from trying to achieve happiness by being correctly understood to just focusing on his work, the creation of his own values for himself.
That is the critical final movement. He realizes his earlier pity, his need to descend and teach, was a temporary temptation. He says that had its time, and he decisively overcomes it. He sheds the last vestige of the ascetic ideal, the desire to save or to shepherd others.
And this final self-liberating realization is announced by the very last chapter, the sign.
As Zarathustra prepares to leave the sleeping, exhausted higher men to their farcical prayers, a sign appears. A cloud of birds symbolizing love and the soft, long roar of a lion. And the lion, in Zarathustra's symbolic language, is the spirit of action. It's the I will that conquers the thou shalt.
And the roar frightens the higher men away.
It violently frightens them away, clearing the stage for Zarathustra's final solitude. His true companions are the eagle and the lion, the proudest and wisest of animals. The final scene shows him completely independent, ready to affirm his path, utterly indifferent to the fate of those below.
He's becoming indifferent to what others make of him, just as he realized the sun doesn't care who it shines on.
His entire trajectory is a radical, continuous retreat from the audience, culminating in a self-reliance so profound it doesn't even seek future better disciples. He is finally truly ready for his great noon.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive. So what are the key takeaways for you, the learner, that tie these explosive philosophical concepts together?
Well, I think we've really traced the powerful connections. The crisis of the death of God necessitates the creative Willtermacht, the mechanism that's driven by the Umbertung, the method, to produce the self-mastering Übermensch, the goal. And that role, that entire life, is ultimately tested by the terrifying necessity of eternal recurrence, the test.
And I think the most counterintuitive, the stickiest points we've explored are so essential to remember. The great reason of the body over the small reason of the spirit. The idea that a friend must be your best enemy to foster creative growth, and that Zarathustra's teaching is fundamentally anti-doctrinal. It requires immense personal suffering and earning.
And this leads us to our final provocative thought. It's rooted in the text's core tension between the unique individual path and the universal nature of the doctrine itself. Zarathustra is the warlocker, the truth laugher. Laughter, as we established, is what protects one from the crippling seriousness of moral constraints. It allows you to create and follow your own morality while being fully aware of its self-chosen contingency.
That makes the heavy light. It allows the spirit to dance over that void created by the death of God.
And the ultimate challenge of Also Sprach Zarathustra is that it suggests that the highest philosophy, the truth that is most vital, is communicated not through literal language or universally true, logically compelling sentences.
But through what?
Through aesthetically resonant imagery, through paradox, and through these self-consuming concepts like recurrence.
So if the truth has to be earned through suffering and confrontation, and it can't be logically downloaded, then what is the true value of the philosophical text itself? It seems to challenge the very belief system of traditional philosophy.
It acts as a crucible, a transformative experience. The measure of truth becomes deeply, radically personal. It's determined by your own strength to assimilate and to live it. Nietzsche asks, Wie viel einer aushält von der Wahrheit? How much truth can one endure? The final question for you, the learner, is not how much you know of this truth, but how much you are willing to suffer and endure to make it your own living, dancing philosophy.